The wind howled against the cliffs as waves crashed below the Blackthorne estate, a monolith of glass and steel that jutted from the coastline like a blade. The mansion stood solitary and silent, its gleaming windows reflecting the deep blue of the Pacific. Inside, Julian Blackthorne sat alone in his private command center, a dark, glass-encased room buried deep within the mansion's northern wing. Monitors lined the walls, dozens of them, each feeding live footage from every corner of the property. His fingers danced over a custom keyboard, scanning analytics, security logs, and infrared heat maps, his face lit only by the cold glow of the screens. At 38, Julian was the architect of an empire, an elusive tech titan with a private fortune built on surveillance, encryption, and AI. His life was efficiency wrapped in silence, luxury wrapped in isolation. He lived behind coded gates, biometric locks, and 1,000 invisible sensors. Trust, to Julian, was a dead language. It had been 5 years since the betrayal, since his own brother siphoned company assets with the woman Julian was days from proposing to, since he stopped believing in people altogether, until today, 3 floors below. Elena Rivera pushed a gray cleaning cart down the polished corridor of the East Wing. She wore her uniform, neatly sleeves rolled just once, hair tied in a low braid, sneakers spotless. Her eyes, rich with warmth, scanned the corridor with a quiet confidence born out of entitlement, but of dignity. She was 24, a sociology major taking night classes, which she wasn't scrubbing imported marble or wiping down museum-grade sculptures. Every paycheck went to her mother's chemotherapy. Every day was a tightrope between grace and exhaustion. The observatory room at the end of the East Wing was her last stop. It was a breathtaking chamber with a glass dome ceiling. Suspended above the ocean like a planetarium, the air smelled of cedar oil and salt. At the center stood a massive telescope and a semicircle of modernist sculptures, a surreal arena of light and shadow. Elena marveled briefly before pulling on her gloves. She worked carefully, methodically, never rushing the details. It was the kind of excellence no one expected from someone in her role, which only made her more determined to deliver it. Reaching for the high shelf behind the sculpture, Elena's elbow nudged the industrial cleaning bottle she had rested on a ledge. It tumbled and hit the floor with a hard thunk. The cap wasn't secure. Harsh-smelling liquid splashed upward, drenching the front of her shirt and soaking her waistband. She gasped as the chemical stung her skin. Looking around quickly, no one in sight, she knew she couldn't risk a reaction. Her spare uniform was in the cart, and the nearest bathroom was 2 floors down. She stepped behind the tallest sculpture, one shaped like a jagged shard of obsidian, and unbuttoned her damp shirt with swift, practiced motions. Her undershirt was ruined too. She peeled off the garments, wiping her skin clean with disinfectant wipes, focused only on finishing before anyone came. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that high above, one of Julian's screens flickered. A security log had pinged, a momentary lapse in a perimeter sensor. Julian, ever thorough, toggled through the interior feeds. One click, then another. The observatory room appeared on screen. At first, all he saw was light. The glass dome, the telescope, the sculpture, and then movement. He froze. Elena, partially undressed, back turned to the camera, moving quickly and with no awareness of being seen. She wasn't posing. She wasn't preening. She was simply solving a problem the way a worker in a silent world solves everything, alone. Julian's hand lifted off the mouse like it had been burned. His jaw clenched. His pulse pounded in his ears. Shame flooded him, swift and brutal. The camera was installed years ago, during an art insurance audit, 100s in the mansion. He had forgotten it even existed. That didn't matter. The moment felt like an intrusion, not hers, his. With a single command, he erased the footage from every backup. He disabled the camera entirely. The screen went black. Then he sat there, in the fortress of his own making, staring into the dark. For years, Julian Blackthorne had been unshakable. But tonight, he couldn't stop thinking about the woman behind the sculpture. And for the first time in a very long time, he wondered if his walls had kept the world out, or kept himself locked in. Julian barely slept that night. He lay in bed staring at the black ceiling of his bedroom, listening to the rhythmic thrum of ocean waves crashing below the cliff. The image of Elena moving swiftly, modestly, unaware looped in his mind like a haunting echo. She hadn't done anything wrong. If anything, she'd handled the situation with a kind of instinctual dignity that only deepened his shame. But the damage wasn't physical. It was something deeper. Something intimate had been taken from her, and he, no matter how accidental, had witnessed it. By morning, Julian had made up his mind. The entire East Wing surveillance system was to be recalibrated, not just disabled, ripped out, purged, redesigned. He didn't trust himself to let it happen again. He emailed a direct order to his head of security, citing privacy enhancement protocols. No one questioned him. No one ever did. Still, Julian couldn't stop thinking about Elena Rivera. He accessed her personnel file for the second time, not to pry, but because he needed to understand the person beyond the accident. She had submitted a brief bio with her hiring papers, 3.8 GPA from community college, volunteered at a local senior center, supporting her mother through stage 3 lymphoma, working 2 jobs. There was no scandal, no motive, no leverage, just quiet, tireless grit. Julian leaned back in his chair, the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office casting golden sunlight across his chest. His reflection looked back at him from the glass, perfectly pressed, clinically detached, emotionally bankrupt. For the first time in years, he hated what he saw. By noon, the estate was moving through its routine like clockwork. Staff changed. Linen, polished banisters, trimmed hedges. Elena was on the garden level, cleaning out the breakfast salon. Julian found himself watching her from the balcony, not through a lens this time, but in person, his eyes following her as she adjusted vases and realigned chairs. She smiled at a passing chef. She laughed softly when a gust of wind knocked a napkin to the floor. There was something about the way she moved through his world, like it wasn't intimidating, like she belonged here more than he did. He didn't notice Rebecca, his longtime assistant, approaching behind him. "You've been watching her," she said, without accusation, only observation. Julian stiffened. "She's thorough." Rebecca gave a slight nod. "She's also kind, smart, and completely unaware of your cameras, or you." He didn't reply. What could he say? That he had seen something he shouldn't have, that he had deleted it, that, somehow, that moment had pierced through his heavily armored detachment. Rebecca crossed her arms. "Julian, if you don't tell her what happened, you're not protecting her. You're protecting your guilt." Julian turned away from the balcony. He hated that she was right. Later that afternoon, Elena stepped into the staff kitchen for a short break. The room was empty, save for a kettle boiling and a few half-finished sandwiches left over from lunch prep. She poured herself tea, then pulled out her worn notebook scribbled with sociology notes and class prompts. She barely noticed the envelope under her mug until she reached for a sip. It was monogrammed, sealed, embossed with the Blackthorne family crest. Her heartbeat quickened. She opened it. "Miss Rivera, there is a matter of personal importance I'd like to discuss with you. Would you join me in the North Wing study at 5 p.m.? J. Blackthorne each read it twice, then a third time. Why would the reclusive billionaire, a man who rarely spoke to anyone outside of executive staff, ask to meet her by 5 o'clock? Elena stood in front of the arched mahogany doors of the North Wing study, heart pounding. She knocked lightly, a voice from inside. "Come in." The room was vast and shadowed, filled with books and maps and screens. But it was the man standing by the fireplace who commanded her attention. Julian Blackthorne looked every inch the legend, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in charcoal gray, but there was a hesitation in his eyes, a softness, and something else. "Guilt. Double quotes Elena," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." She did, slowly. "Am I in trouble?" "No," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong." "But I did." She blinked. He took a breath, then another. "There are cameras throughout the estate. Discreet, for safety, mostly. Last night, I was reviewing footage because of a sensor glitch. That's when I saw you in the observatory." Elena's spine went rigid. Her eyes widened. Her hand tightened around her mug. "I closed the feed the moment I realized. I deleted it. Permanently. I disabled the camera. I should have done 8 years ago, but none of that changes what happened. I saw something I had no right to see, and I'm deeply sorry." For a long moment, the room was silent. Elena stood up, not with anger, but with grace. Her voice, when it came, was low but firm. "You didn't look away out of guilt, Mr. Blackthorne. You looked away because you knew it mattered. That's rare." Julian stared at her. "I should be furious," she continued. "I should storm out. But I've worked in places where men in power took much more than glimpses. And they didn't apologize. She stepped toward the door. Thank you for your honesty. It means more than you know. Then, with a glance back, she added, you don't have to be perfect to be decent. And with that, she was gone, leaving Julian standing in the cold fortress of his own making, wondering how a woman who earned $18 an hour had just made him feel like a man for the first time in years. Julian didn't work the next day, not in the way he usually did. Buried in coding scripts and acquisitions, his calendar remained full, but his mind was elsewhere. Meetings blurred, financial forecasts read like static. He found himself checking hallway monitors, not for security risks, but for the briefest glimpse of Elena Rivera. He couldn't explain the pull. This wasn't lust. It wasn't fascination. It was disruption, deep, uncomfortable, undeniable. For the first time in years, a woman had looked him in the eyes and seen a man, not a bank account, not a recluse, not a myth, and then she'd walked away without asking for anything. He found himself wondering what her laugh sounded like when it wasn't weighed down by exhaustion, what her thoughts were about the books in the East Wing library, what she dreamed of when she wasn't fighting to survive. At 9:12 a.m. He walked past the conservatory twice. At 9:41, he paused outside the staff courtyard, pretending to answer a call. At 10:04, he saw her. She was on her knees, trimming the edges of a lavender bush near the fountain, hair tied in a high ponytail, hands in gloves. She didn't look up, didn't notice him. She was humming softly, entirely lost in her own world. That's when he knew he was in trouble. By noon, Julian was standing in the study again, pacing. He had to be careful. The power imbalance was too real. He couldn't afford to be seen as a predator, and more importantly, he couldn't afford to become one. His own rules were clear, no personal entanglements with staff. But he also couldn't pretend anymore that this woman hadn't changed something inside him. He made a call. Rebecca, he said, voice low, get Thomas in here. I need to discuss a personnel reassignment, and I want full access to Miss Rivera's academic records. You're promoting her? Rebecca asked, surprised. Not yet, Julian replied. I'm giving her options, and I want her to know it's on her terms. Meanwhile, Elena stood beneath the rose arbor near the south garden, taking a rare break. Her phone buzzed. From Thomas K. Julian Blackthorne would like to speak with you privately this evening. No disciplinary action. 6 p.m. Rooftop terrace. Rooftop terrace. She'd never even seen it. It was one of the mansion's most exclusive areas, off limits to non-executive personnel. Her stomach fluttered, and not from nerves alone. By 6 p.m., the sky had turned a dusky gold. Ocean breeze stirring the potted palms on the terrace. The panoramic view stretched endlessly, ocean on one side, rolling vineyards on the other. Elena arrived, cautious, clutching a folder of her class readings as if they might shield her. Julian was already there, standing by the edge in a black cashmere coat, back to her, hands clasped. When he turned, his expression was unreadable. Thank you for coming, he said. This won't take long. Elena nodded. Of course. I asked you here, Julian said, stepping closer, because I need to ask something of you. And I want you to know it comes with no expectations, no strings. She furrowed her brow. He handed her an envelope. She opened it. Inside, a formal offer. A paid internship under his new nonprofit division, focused on educational equity and urban reform. Flexible hours, scholarship coverage, and an NDA waiving her cleaning duties entirely without termination. Her fingers trembled. I don't understand. I watched you struggle not to shrink in that room yesterday, he said quietly. And then you walked away like you owned your worth. Most people crumble when power tilts the wrong way. You didn't. Elena looked up at him, stunned. You once said I didn't have to be perfect to be decent. Julian continued. Let me prove I listened. You deserve more than gloves and bleach. And you deserve to choose that more for yourself. For a long moment, Elena said nothing. Then, slowly, she placed the folder on the nearby table. You're offering me a future. I'm offering you space to build your own, he said. She took a breath. And why me, Mr. Blackthorne? Why not a polished Ivy grad, or someone already qualified? Julian's answer was quiet. Because, when no one was watching, you showed integrity, and that's the one thing you can't teach. The terrace went quiet again. A gull cried overhead. The wind picked up. Then Elena said something that struck Julian like a bolt to the chest. I'm not afraid of powerful men, she whispered, but I am afraid of hoping they might care. And Julian, ever composed, ever armored, broke for just a second. "I care, Elena." Her eyes softened, but she didn't smile. "Not yet. Then let's see if you mean it." That night, as Julian stood in the darkened mansion hallway alone, he realized this wasn't attraction. This was the beginning of something neither of them could control, but someone else was already watching. Down in the operations office, Celeste Rowan had seen the reassignment notice. She hadn't been summoned to approve it, and she didn't like being bypassed. Her gaze narrowed as she clicked through the files, stopping on one name, Elena Rivera. Celeste's polished fingers tapped once on the desk. So this is who had his attention. Then let's see what she's hiding. And just like that, the real games began. The storm rolled in at midnight. Winds howled across the cliffs like ancient spirits waking from slumber, lashing rain against the glass walls of Blackthorne Manor. The Pacific raged below, waves slamming the jagged shoreline with primal fury. But inside the fortress of surveillance and steel, a quieter tempest was brewing, one that would change everything. Julian stood alone in the observatory room, now repurposed into a design studio for the Blackthorne Foundation. The space had been transformed since the day Elena had stood here vulnerable and unseen. Now, it was filled with open plans for community schools, gallery pieces sourced for public exhibitions, and donation reports detailing programs targeting youth poverty. It was Elena's vision, but it had become their mission. She had accepted the internship offer on one condition: no special treatment. "I want the work to speak for itself," she had told him. Julian agreed. And yet, it became harder each day to pretend his admiration hadn't become something deeper. They were spending more time together now, curating, designing, debating. Elena challenged him in ways no one dared. She questioned his policies, his philanthropy strategy, even the color scheme of his branding. He found himself craving her mind as much as her presence, craving the way she saw the world. But not everyone appreciated the shift. Celeste Rowan's patience had worn thin. For 6 years, she had stood at Julian's right hand, coordinating his life, filtering his correspondence, blocking out opportunists. She had been indispensable until now, and she knew it. It had started with the canceled board meetings, then the reassigned contracts. Then came her name missing from the Foundation's new advisory board, replaced by a 24-year-old cleaning intern from East LA. Celeste had gone from confidant to ghost in 6 weeks. Now she wanted revenge. The storm gave her cover, while Julian worked late upstairs and the staff huddled in their quarters from the rain. Celeste entered the east corridor with a copied master key. She moved fast, knowing which door led to the secure files archive. Elena's personnel folder was stored there. Digital backups had been restricted after Julian's privacy overhaul. Celeste scanned the documents swiftly. Academic transcripts, clean background, perfect attendance. But there, in the stack of supplemental materials, something caught her eye. A sealed manila envelope with Elena's signature. She opened it. It was an old hospital invoice, partially redacted. Treatment records, Elena's mother, but something didn't add up. The dates overlap with the community center project Elena had claimed to volunteer for. A lie. Celeste's eyes gleamed. She took a photo of the document. Then she slid the envelope back and slipped away. The next morning, the estate was buzzing. Storm damage had knocked out the East Gate sensors. Half the kitchen staff hadn't made it through the mud-soaked roads, but none of it mattered as much as what waited on Julian's desk. A printed email, anonymous, no sender, no IP, Mr. Blackthorne, before you give her your world, maybe ask her why she lied about her mother's treatment. Timeline, not everyone who plays the victim deserves your trust. Attached, the photograph Celeste had taken. Julian stared at the image for a long time, hands clenched. He didn't want to believe it, but the date on the hospital invoice was clear. It directly contradicted Elena's statement during their first rooftop meeting. She told him her mother had been in chemotherapy for a full year. The document suggested otherwise, and just like that, the cracks returned. That afternoon, Elena found him cold, distant. Their project review session was curt. When she brought up new proposals, he brushed them off with polite detachment. No morning, coffee, no eye contact, only walls dotted by sunset. Elena knew something had changed. She stood in the Foundation office, staring at the empty chair he usually filled. Her heart ached not because she needed his attention, but because the shift was so familiar. The freeze-out, the suspicion, the punishment for something she didn't understand. Back in the observatory room, Julian pored over the image again. Rationally, it could have been an error, a misfiled record. Emotionally, he felt the betrayal flare like old scars being ripped open. He'd let someone in, again and again. The story might have been false. But just as he was about to forward the document to HR, he noticed something strange. The redaction line over the hospital record wasn't hospital standard. It was digitally added, sloppily. A reflection off the paper's edge showed a faint shimmer indicating post-processing. The photo had been tampered with. Julian froze. Someone had manufactured the contradiction. A deeper alarm rang in him now. Not about Elena, but about who had access to this file. The only person with that clearance was his jaw clenched. Celeste. That night, Julian summoned Thomas, his estate manager and oldest remaining ally. I want full system logs from last night. Every door accessed. Every file open. Discreetly, Thomas nodded, understood. But it was already delayed. The damage was done. Elena had gone home early. She had looked tired, hollow, like the fight inside her was flickering out. She didn't know what had caused the shift, but she recognized the pattern. She trusted a powerful man again, and it felt like she was about to lose everything she had worked for. Again. The next morning, she didn't show up for work. Julian called her 3 times. No answer. By noon, Thomas returned with the logs. Sir, you need to see this. On the screen, Celeste's ID, logged into restricted archives, logged into Julian's printer, logged into his email queue. Julian's blood went ice cold. She didn't just want Elena gone. She wanted to ruin her, and she had almost succeeded. He stood up, heart pounding. Elena's not answering her phone. He said, find her, now. The rain had stopped, but the aftermath remained. Mudslides choked the hillside roads. The Pacific, once shimmering and serene, now turned with a brooding violence. The skies were gray, thick with tension, as if the earth itself was bracing for a reckoning. And inside Blackthorne Manor, a storm of a different kind was about to break loose. Julian stood in the heart of his command center, face pale, fingers twitching with rage. The logs didn't lie. Celeste had entered the East Wing at 12:47 a.m., stayed for 13 minutes, and emerged with a copied access code used to manipulate the Foundation server. She had faked the email. She had fabricated the document. She had nearly destroyed the one honest connection Julian had built in half a decade. He called her to the study. Celeste arrived precisely at 8 a.m., her heels tapping the marble floor with practiced poise. She was dressed immaculately, her hair twisted into a flawless chignon, her pearl earrings catching the light. But her eyes, once confident, flickered when she saw Julian's expression. You wanted to see me? She asked, voice carefully neutral. Julian didn't look up at first. He dropped a folder onto the desk between them. Inside, security logs, door access records, and the original unaltered hospital invoice, recovered from the archives by Thomas's backup system. You lied, he said, voice like ice breaking. Celeste didn't flinch. I don't know what you're talking about. He looked at her now, not with suspicion, with certainty. You forged a photo, sent an anonymous message to my private account, and tried to frame Elena Rivera. You accessed restricted files without authorization and manipulated timestamps. And you did all this because what? Celeste. You were jealous? Her lips curled, but her mask was cracking. I did what you were blind to do. She snapped. She's beneath you, Julian. She's a cleaning girl with good lighting and a sob story. You were falling for a fantasy. I was falling, Julian said, voice low, for the first person who's ever looked me in the eyes without wanting anything but to be treated fairly, and you tried to destroy her for that. She took a breath, shoulders straightening. You'll never prove intent. I don't have to, he replied. Your badge data and the original server timestamps are already archived with legal counsel. HR will handle the rest. Celeste's composure cracked for real then. Her voice trembled. You're ending my career over her. Julian leaned in slightly. No, you ended your career the moment you weaponized someone else's trauma to feed your ego. She left in silence, escorted out by security 10 minutes later, her heels echoing like gunshots across the marble floor. But Julian didn't feel victorious. He felt the opposite, because Elena was still gone. He had called her cell, left messages, sent emails, even sent a driver to her apartment. Nothing. It wasn't until later that afternoon that he found her accidentally. Or maybe fate wasn't done with them yet. Julian had driven into the city unannounced. He wasn't sure what he was looking for until he saw her, across the street, sitting on a bench outside County General Hospital. Her coat was too thin for the wind. Her face was pale, lips pressed together as she stared through the glass at her mother, who was now officially in remission. He stepped out of the car and approached quietly, slowly, as if afraid to shatter the fragile shell she wore like armor. She saw him, her body tensed, but she didn't get up. "I thought you believed me," she said, not looking at him. "I did," Julian replied. "Then I doubted myself, not because of what you did, but because of what someone else made me think." Elena turned her head, eyes hard and wet. "You thought I faked my mother's diagnosis?" "No," he said quickly. "I thought I misunderstood something, and I should have come to you first. Instead, I froze. I've spent years not trusting anyone, but that wasn't your burden to carry." Silence fell between them like rain that hadn't yet landed. He crouched down beside her, not caring about the stares of passersby. "I fired her," he said. "The one who framed you. She's gone." Elena exhaled. Her shoulders loosened slightly, but the wound was still open. "You don't know what it's like," she whispered, "to be questioned every time you try to rise, to be viewed as suspicious just for existing in places you're not supposed to." Julian's voice was soft. "You're right. I don't, but I want to. I want to try, not as your employer, not even as your mentor, as a man who fell in love with the way you hold your dignity like a sword." She looked at him then. "Really?" "Looked. I never asked for any of this," she said, "and I never deserved your grace," he replied. A pause, then a question. "Will you come back?" She hesitated. "I can't promise I won't fall," Julian added, "but I can promise this: if I do, it'll be forward, toward you." Tears welled in her eyes, not because she was weak, but because she was tired of being strong in the shadows. She stood, and for the first time in weeks, her voice was steady. "Then don't just say it." She held out her hand. "Show me." He took it without hesitation, and in that moment on a cold bench outside a public hospital, a billionaire with the world at his fingertips and a woman who once mopped his floors became something undeniable, equals, in truth. But just as their hands clasped, as redemption began, a camera shutter clicked from across the street. Unseen, unheard, and very, very dangerous, because not all enemies had been fired. Some were just getting started. The photograph appeared online 3 days later. It wasn't on a major outlet. Not yet. Just a grainy post buried on a gossip forum, captioned with thinly veiled venom, "Blackthorne's maid-turned-mistress. Billionaire seen begging on a bench." Downtown. Within hours, it had spread like wildfire, first to anonymous Twitter accounts, then a few low-tier tabloids, and finally, by day 4, it made the sidebar of Pagisics. A zoomed-in frame showed Julian Blackthorne kneeling beside Elena Rivera outside County General. He was holding her hand. His expression was raw, vulnerable, human. And in Julian's world, human was a synonym for weak. At Blackthorne Industries, the board erupted in silent chaos. Phone calls, legal threats. PR teams mobilized instantly, drafting crisis statements and setting up war rooms. Investors wanted answers. Shareholders demanded optics control. And the most powerful man in Silicon Valley was suddenly at risk of being reduced to a headline punchline. Julian, for his part, didn't blink. He was done. Hiding. He stood before the board that Friday morning in a navy blue suit, every inch the founder, the CEO, the myth. But this time, he didn't bring spreadsheets or forecasts. He brought clarity. "Yes," he said. "The woman in the photo is Elena Rivera. She works for my foundation. She used to clean my estate. She's also studying urban policy and has helped architect one of the most successful philanthropic rollouts this company has ever produced." The room was dead quiet, and yes, he added, "I care about her personally." Murmurs rose. One board member shifted uncomfortably, another cleared his throat. Julian continued, calm and firm. "You can call it a scandal if you want. You can call it unorthodox. But what you won't do is question her integrity, or mine. Not while you're sitting on the profits her community programs help generate." One hand tentatively raised. "What about public fallout? What about brand perception?" Julian smiled coldly. "Let them look. They've watched my fortune grow from behind glass walls for a decade. Maybe it's time they see the man who built it." The board fell silent again. Julian left without waiting for their blessing. But the war wasn't over. Because Celeste Rowan, disgraced and dismissed, had not faded away. She'd taken her story elsewhere, and someone had listened. By the following Monday, an anonymous whistleblower article hit a fringe investigative blog. It detailed allegations of grooming, of power imbalance, of exploitation of domestic staff. The author quoted unnamed insiders and implied that Elena's rapid rise within the Blackthorne Foundation was due to personal entanglements rather than merit. Elena saw it during a break between her night classes. She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She simply closed the browser and picked up her textbook. What Julian saw read, this wasn't just about a lie anymore. It was character assassination. It was war. He activated a legal response team within 24 hours, filing defamation suits, digital takedowns, and cyber tracing to track the original source. His security division uncovered the IP chain, an encrypted email tied to a VPN routed through Canada, but originating from a luxury condo in San Francisco rented under Celeste's cousin's name. He had her, but Elena stopped him. You could destroy her, she said, sitting across from him in his study. Bankrupt her, bury her, and she'd deserve it. But then you become the thing people already say you are. Julian clenched his jaw. She tried to ruin you. She failed, Elena said simply, because the truth survived. I'm still here. We're still here. You don't need to win. We already did. Julian looked at her, really looked, and realized for all his billions, she was the wealth he never knew he needed. That night, they issued a joint statement. No PR jargon, no lawyers. Just a video. Simple, unpolished. Julian in an open collared shirt, Elena beside him, her hair down, eyes direct. Julian spoke first. I'm Julian Blackthorne. You know me as a CEO, a builder, a billionaire. What you might not know is that, for most of my life, I was afraid of being seen, really seen. He paused, looked at Elena, until this woman sat across from me and refused to flinch. Elena continued, steady and soft. I'm not a social climber. I'm not a gold digger. I'm not anyone's victim. I'm Elena Rivera, daughter of a woman who beat cancer, sister to a boy in high school, student, and yes, someone who cleaned rooms to pay for dreams. I didn't expect this story, but I'm not ashamed of it. The video ended with Julian's final words. We won't hide. We won't apologize, and we won't let the world weaponize love. The video went viral in hours. Not because of clickbait, but because the world recognized truth when it saw it. Suddenly, the scandal flipped. Public sympathy surged toward Elena. Influencers praised her courage. Working class communities rallied behind her. Think pieces exploded, from Mop to Mick, the woman who changed the Titan. Days later, Julian and Elena appeared on a major talk show. It was an APR stunt. It was a statement of unity. They spoke about class, about power, about choosing dignity even when the world demanded shame. And then, on the last question unscripted, Raw, the host, asked, where do you go from here? Julian turned to Elena. And for the first time, without hesitation, he said, I go wherever she goes. Elena smiled. Then let's go forward. 2 months later, in the newly renovated observatory, beneath a dome of glass and a sky full of stars, Julian proposed not with spectacle, but with sincerity. I don't want to own you, he said. I want to walk beside you. Will you? Elena said yes. And in a house that once watched her undress in secrecy, now filled with laughter, music, and sunlight, love lived wide open, not perfect, but powerful. And finally, free.